Hi, I'd like to welcome you all here today to talk a little bit about the MAEAP, or Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program. My name is Joe Kelpinski. I'm a MAEAP verifier down in the southeast portion of the state. And today at this meeting, we're going to talk just a little bit about the MAEAP program, where it came from, where it's at, what's involved in the program, and we'll go from there. Doing a little bit of background on MAEAP. MAEAP was actually kind of formulated as a partnership. It started way back in 1998. It was a vision of several of the industries in the state, particularly Michigan Farm Bureau, Michigan State University and MSU Extension, the Michigan Pork Producers Association, Michigan Milk Producers Association, the Michigan Corn Growers, and the Michigan Soybean Growers, to put together a proactive environmental program for producers in the state that would take them above and beyond the current right to farm law at that time, and hopefully give them more peace of mind that they were following environmental regulations within the state. The partnership continued for a couple years, and in December 2000 they actually signed their first partnership agreement, which kind of outlined the basic structure and shape of what the MAEAP program would look like. Staff were hired at the Department of Ag and Rural Development to fill those positions to actually make that program come into being, and they began their work on the MAEAP program. The program did our first livestock verification in 2002, our first farmstead verification in 2003, and our first cropping system verification in 2005. Since that time, the biggest change to MAEAP was the MAEAP legislation enacted by Governor Snyder in 2011, which we will talk about a little bit later. The mission of MAEAP is to develop and implement a proactive environmental assurance program that targets farms of all sizes and types in the state of Michigan. We know we can fix any problem from an environmental perspective on any farm given enough money, but as we all know, there's not always enough money to fix problems on a farm. What MAEAP tries to do is address issues on the farm in a way that allows the producer to perhaps make management changes or change standard operating procedures in such a way that it allows them to meet the standards of MAEAP and become verified without necessarily spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix their issues. The partnership over time, over the ensuing 12 or 13 years, has continued to grow. Currently, there's over 60 partners involved in the MAEAP program, and we continue to add partners on almost a monthly basis. MAEAP actually is kind of what we call a three-system, three-phase approach. I mentioned briefly the systems: livestock, cropping, and farmstead. And then there's three phases that are also involved when farmers are attempting to go through the MAEAP program. The first of these is an education phase. Education occurs at any number of different types of meetings. Rarely will producers know that they are actually attending what we call a phase one education meeting. Generally, they attend a meeting sponsored by MSU Extension or their local co-op, or perhaps their seed corn company that targets them and looks at particular issues. Perhaps they have a day where they study changes in the fuel law or changes in fertilizer storage laws. Or perhaps they're looking at wellhead management in ways to keep things secure from a safe water standpoint. When they go through these programs, they'll also have what we call the portion where we discuss MAEAP, which is what we're doing here today. Everybody that becomes involved in the MAEAP program goes through the education phase. It's a requirement initially of the MAEAP program. And those of you that are attending this meeting today or watching this video, by doing this, by watching this video, by participating in this meeting, are actually now involved in the MAEAP process. Whether you choose to go any further is up to you. But if you do choose to go further, your next step would be to work with a local MAEAP technician, and they're housed in many counties throughout the state. I've included or have a list here of the MAEAP techs around the state where they can be found and their contact information if you're interested in talking to the MAEAP technician that covers your area. If you choose to do that, the MAEAP technician comes out on your farm. It's a confidential visit at your request, and they will actually do an on-farm risk assessment. And what the risk assessment does is look at, depending on the system you're going in, it looks at the various environmental risks associated with that. For example, in the farmstead system, predominantly we're going to look at wellheads, we're going to look at pesticide storage, fertilizer storage, and fuel storage. Those are the big four for that system. For livestock, it's essentially a lot about manure, how it's stored, how it's transported, how it's land applied. Are we using it agronomically? And are we doing it in a safe manner that prevents it from entering waterways of the state? And if we were going through the cropping system, we're going to look more at things like your nutrient management plan, your spray records, chemical utilization, how you apply chemicals, are you following labels, things like that. After your technician's done working with you, they're basically going to, by these risk groups, assign a low, medium, or high risk to your current practices. Not every question that they ask you is going to be required for MAEAP verification, but those questions that are will require you to take some sort of action to mitigate that risk. That your MAEAP technician will actually help you implement a plan to address those risks, which you progress at your own pace. You're basically going to be allowed to work on those at your speed as it's comfortable for you, and perhaps even as economics permit if larger changes are needed where money has to be invested to make the change. Finally, once you address those risks and get them to a point where they're acceptable for MAEAP verification, you call into the Department of Ag and Rural Development. You will talk to our administrative support person, Heather Castile, and she's going to basically take some information from you and send the forms out to the various verifiers depending on the area of the state. If you're in the Southeast, I'll see you. If you're in the Southwest, Josh Appleby's going to see you. If you're West Central and Northwest, it'll be Dan Busby. In the central part of the state and up through the thumb, it's going to be Tom Young. And anything pretty much north of M61 on the east side of the state, as well as the UP, is going to be covered by Aaron Satchel. We will contact you to set up a visit. Again, it will be a confidential visit. We won't surprise you. We don't just show up on the farm. And essentially, we will bring a condensed version of the risk assessment that your MAEAP technician used with you. Our condensed version only contains the questions that are required for MAEAP verification. And just like your MAEAP technician, we're going to walk around the farm with you. We're going to take a look at those risks. We're going to make sure that they were addressed, that any high or medium risk areas that you had, those threats have been mitigated. And at that point in time, if we find everything, basically the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, you will be considered MAEAP verified and be able to have a MAEAP sign on your farm. MAEAP takes a kind of holistic approach to everything. We look at all the environmental risks on the farm. Now, depending on what system you're doing, we may not be looking at everything at once, but ultimately a lot of farms become involved in one system and we address the issues on the farm as they pertain to that system, and then we'll move on to another system and look at the risks pertaining to those. Essentially, at the end of the day, if you were verified in all systems that applied to your farm, you know and have some peace of mind that you are following all environmental laws and regulations, including the right to farm and the right to farm generally accepted agricultural management practices for your operation. The MAEAP technicians, when they work with you, will also help you put together an emergency plan, which will address any potential emergencies on your farm. That might include a fertilizer spill, fuel spill, issues with manure application or transportation, a spill there or some sort of release, and what you would do in the event of each one of those particular emergencies on your farm. Here we see a picture of basically just one page out of the farmstead assessment, or the pharmacist as we call it. And you can see the risk questions are grouped by areas. For example, you'll have questions that all pertain to fuel, all pertain to pesticide storage, all pertain to your chemical storage. And the MAEAP technician is going to walk through each of these with you. They're going to take a look at things with you there. And they're simply going to ask you questions, and how you answer the question and what the technician's seeing while they stand there with you will determine what level of risk you have for that particular question on your farm. There's nothing strenuous. Again, I reiterate, it's confidential. But what it does is give you a good perspective on where your potential, we call them risks, but I also like to refer to them as liabilities. We live in an era where people love to sue. And when we're doing risk assessments, anytime you reduce your risk in any particular area, you're going to reduce your potential liabilities. MAEAP has caught on a national scale as well. Michigan did develop the program, but it has received a lot of attention nationally. We have our partners that are involved in the MAEAP program. Because a lot of them are large, entities that cover multiple states, they give us some national exposure there. NASCA recently covered or had a yearly annual meeting where MAEAP was one of the focus of one of their sessions. We came in and we talked about the MAEAP program, the template, how it works, how it can be adapted to their state. The National Association of Conservation Districts also did the same thing. They featured MAEAP prominently in a national webinar where they discussed the program and the applicability of taking it to other states. And then it's happened in Region 7 for US EPA, which is the Great Lakes region, where the state ag directors have also been taking a hard look at MAEAP and seeing if they can adapt a similar model to their states. Why do farmers participate? Basically, a couple of the big things are the environmental concerns on their farm. Again, that goes back to liabilities or potential liabilities, which could result in costly issues on your farm. So they want to get those addressed. When MAEAP was put into law, there were some legislative incentives that came with it. But a lot of producers just do it because they want the peace of mind that they're following state and federal laws. You can see some other things folks do here. But essentially, as I've talked to producers over the year, they went through the program because they knew they wanted to have peace of mind. They wanted to know they were doing the right thing, and they wanted to let their neighbors know via this MAEAP sign that they were doing everything they could to protect the environment in their area. What does our program address? Depending on the system you're going through, we're going to look at pesticide and fertilizer storage and use, fuel storage, well safety, soil and wind erosion and sensitive areas. Perhaps you have wetlands in your area when you're out spraying or doing manure applications. Those become potentially sensitive areas, as well as do non-farm houses, businesses, government buildings in the area. We're going to take a look at water resources. And most importantly for farmers, we're going to look at all related right to farm generally accepted agricultural management practices and environmental laws. We're going to make sure that you're in compliance and conformance with all those laws. Again, to give you peace of mind, but also to guarantee you that you have right to farm protection as long as you continue to follow the practices that we see that day on the farm. Currently in the MAEAP program, there's been tons of environmental gains. We have over 10,000 farms that are participating with nearly 2,000. At this point in time, it may be even over 2,000 verifications. Sediment, which is the biggest pollutant in the United States, has been reduced to our rivers and streams by over 347,000 tons in 2013, or about 31,000 dump trucks. Verified nutrient management plans on over 500,000 acres of farmland. Phosphorus delivery, which is responsible for the algal blooms on Lake Erie and frequently on Saginaw Bay as well, has been reduced by over 592,000 pounds, which is enough to grow 148,000 tons of algae. So this is a significant amount. And we've reduced nitrogen delivery as well to surface and groundwater by over roughly 1.3 million pounds in 2013. MAEAP stewardship practices include almost 729,000 acres that receiving pesticides have approved pest management plans. Over 13,000 acres of filter strips have been installed by farms that have been participating in the MAEAP program. Almost 2,300 gullies have been stabilized. And astronomically, over the past few years, about $1.2 million per year is spent for practice implementation by farmers working towards MAEAP verification. These are dollars that they voluntarily spent to try and make sure that their farms are environmentally sound and environmentally in conformance with all applicable laws. The biggest change to MAEAP over the last few years is it was codified into law in 2011 via Public Act 1 and 2 of 2011. These were the first law that Governor Snyder signed into law in his new administration. Basically, it changed MAEAP slightly in how we did business, but not a lot. It made us create standards. So instead of having a checklist, the questions that we now asked had to have a measurable standard upon which they could be compared. We basically have an advisory council, which is made up of the established partners. Not every partner is represented at the advisory council, but the advisory council does represent a cross-section of the membership. Those are appointed roles, and then they have to be approved by the Ag Commission. We have a new memorandum of understanding with the Department of Environmental Quality as it pertains to manure complaints, spills, things that are basically potentially damaging to the environment from an agricultural perspective. Most importantly, the MAEAP legislation put some incentives into law for producers. It gave them protection in the event of an accidental discharge. For example, you're driving down the road hauling your manure spreader, it blows a tire, breaks an axle, flips and goes into the ditch, and you have a spill that winds up in a river. In days of old, before the MAEAP legislation, you would be responsible for reparation to the resource, which means you were going to pay for any fish you killed or any damage to the resource, as well as potential fines and penalties from the Department of Environmental Quality. Under MAEAP, if you're verified in all applicable systems, so for a typical cropping farm, that would be the farmstead system and the cropping system, you would still have to pay the resource damage, but you would not be subject to fines or penalties, as long as you were following MAEAP standards at the time of the incident. The same if you did a land application of manure and you had a surprise rainstorm that created a gully washer and it wound up washing the manure off the field and into a ditch or stream. You again would receive protection. That's considered a non-point source of discharge, which in the past you could be fined for. Now you would not be fined. You would simply have to pay the resource restitution, and you would have to have a corrective plan in place to make sure that you avoided a future discharge. Probably to me the biggest carrot in the incentives was what I call the TMDL incentive, or total maximum daily loading. And what this does is EPA is looking at managing watersheds by what we call TMDLs. And TMDLs could severely restrict agriculture, and have in some areas where they've been implemented, because they can make you take corrective actions even if you have best management practices in place. What the MAEAP legislation said is if your watershed was declared to be managed under a TMDL system by EPA, that if you were MAEAP verified, you would be already considered to be doing all best management practices and would not be able to be required by EPA to do anything above and beyond what you are already doing. It's a huge carrot. TMDLs aren't in many watersheds yet, but I guarantee you they will be coming to a watershed near you. The programs continue to grow over the years. As you can see from this graph, we have pretty much a linear growth in the livestock system, but the farmstead and cropping systems since about 2010 or 11 have been really on steep curves up. They're growing extremely well. Re-verification growths as well have continued. As farms stay involved in the program, they are required to be re-verified every 3 years. They have continued to stay involved and active in the MAEAP program. Active verifications as a percent of the total verifications were 84% in fiscal year 13, which means basically those farms were pretty much 84% of all that we've ever done have continued to stay involved in the MAEAP program. MAEAP gives you a chance for local involvement for producers and their communities to let their neighbors know that they're doing a good job, that they're environmentally sound, that they're doing their best to protect the environment. It also has made communities aware of the program and what farmers have to do, ag producers are doing to limit potential pollution from farming operations in their communities. So it's been a win-win for everybody. Some farms have used it for promotions. They basically use the MAEAP sign to differentiate their product from other people's products to hopefully add value to their commodity that they're producing. Michigan farmers are proud to be MAEAP verified. The program continues to grow. We have excellent participation from producers, and I hope those of you watching this video today will take the time to become involved in the MAEAP program, hopefully progressing to the point where you can be MAEAP verified and join 2,000 other farms in the state of Michigan. Thank you.